Hello and welcome to the Bartholomew School GCSE English Language Revision video for English Language Paper 2 Question 4. This is the comparison question and this video is for students who are in Year 11. We're going to be working through the example paper on the two texts that are about soldiers. You need to make sure that you've got in front of you a copy of source A, which is from the Help for Heroes website, and a copy of source B, which is also about soldiers by Charles Dickens. And you need to make sure that you also have a copy of the question paper. If you don't yet have these, you can access them via the school SharePoint pages, the learning platform. So you just go to the English page and then you select Year 10 and 11. When you're there, you should see a folder called Year 11 GCSE English Language. And when you click through, you should find the PDF document called Soldiers Paper. So if you haven't got the paper, pause this video, find the document, print everything out, and then we'll be ready to get started. Question 4 is the comparison question, which asks you to compare both sources in their entirety. In this paper, the question is as follows. For this question, you need to refer to the whole of source A together with the whole of source B. Compare how the two writers convey their different attitudes to the soldiers in the texts. In your answer, you could compare their different attitudes, compare the methods they use to convey their attitudes, and support your ideas with references to both texts, and that is worth 16 marks. So we're looking for their different attitudes to the soldiers. So obviously the first thing that we need to do is read the sources. So I suggest that you pause the video to read source A, and then pause a second time and read source B. Now turn to the question paper again. So we're going to begin by reading the question, and you need a highlighter to do this effectively. If you need to pause the video to get a highlighter, please do so. Compare how the two writers convey their different attitudes to the soldiers in the texts. As we've mentioned before, the question asks you about both sources. You will be in serious trouble with the marks if you only write about one of them. We want a balance of both sources here when we answer this question. This question is always going to be about attitudes, ideas or perspectives. In this case, it's attitudes to the soldiers that you're being asked to compare. Attitudes to the soldiers in both sources. But really importantly, it's not just asking you what their attitudes are. It's very, very important that we notice the word how in the question. This is your clue that tells you that the examiner wants you to write about methods and techniques and analyse language, not just list the different attitudes. So to begin your answer to this question, you need a good understanding of the attitudes that the writers have and why they have them. You can work this out using a kind of formula. The form of the writing plus the perspective of the writer equals the likely bias of the text. Form plus perspective equals bias. So for example, source A, we're told, is from the Help for Heroes website. So the form is a website article. The perspective is a charity who takes care of returning soldiers. So the likely bias that we can work out is that it's going to be sympathetic to the soldiers. It's going to admire their bravery and their heroism, and it might encourage us to contribute to the charity in some way. You can work all of those things out without even reading the source. Source B is a little bit trickier perhaps, but its form is a personal account, and the perspective is that of an eyewitness, so therefore it's likely to give a more emotive version of events. So it's not an expert opinion, it's not an unbiased perspective, it's going to be informed by personal opinion. So these things together will give you a brief introduction, and that might end up looking something like this. Whereas source A is taken from a website for a charity for returning soldiers, source B is a personal account of an outsider seeing injured soldiers in the Victorian times. Therefore, both sources give biased accounts that sympathise with the soldiers. But while source A tells us an uplifting story so that the reader admires the soldiers and wants to contribute to the charity, source B uses an emotive eyewitness story to make the reader feel moved and outraged. So I've said what the form is at the beginning. I've talked about the bias, and I've also tried to identify why they might be different. The charity is likely to be uplifting, the personal account is likely to be very emotive. So for the main body of this answer, you might well have in your revision notes something that looks like this to help you structure your paragraphs. Essentially, each paragraph should look like this, and you should aim for 3 or 4 of them. You should start with a comparative sentence, and then you analyse the language of source A in detail, followed by the language of source B in detail. You should then end your paragraph with a mini conclusion. The planning stage of this answer is really important because to be successful here, you need to both have a secure understanding of what the attitudes are that are being presented and be able to justify your ideas with quotations that are carefully chosen and that it's possible to analyse. So have a look through both texts now, pausing the video, using a highlighter and seeing what attitudes and quotations strike you to start with. An easy way of beginning with this comparison question is to ask yourself these questions. Which one is more positive? Which one is more negative? In the examples from the soldier paper, it's clear that source A is largely positive and source B is largely negative, but saying this obviously won't get us very far. We need to be more intelligent than this, so the next step is to come up with 3 or so reasons why you think these sources are positive or negative. 3 reasons for source A might be that it's positive because it's hopeful about Simon's future, it's positive because it admires Simon's bravery, and it's positive because it focuses on Simon's personal suffering to create sympathy for him. And for source B, we might say that it's largely negative because the writer is horrified by the soldier's conditions, it's hopeless about the soldier's futures, and it's negative because although it's sympathetic, it's largely impersonal, so there's no kind of sense of engaging with one particular soldier. The next step is to choose quotations that we could analyse to prove these ideas. So you could pause the video here to do this yourself, or you could continue watching and use some of the examples that I'm about to give you. We have to prove our ideas with well-chosen quotations. Pause now if you want to do this yourself, or continue watching if you'd like to just go through this together. You could continue mind mapping your points, like we had on the previous slide, but I've switched to a table just to make it a bit clearer on the screen, because there's lots of ideas and it's very busy. So basically what you'll see here is that I've turned each of my ideas into a comparison, and then I've chosen a quotation from each text that I think I could analyse. I've bullet pointed some analysis with technical terms to show what I mean by this. So what I'd like you to do is to pause the video and read really carefully through all of the points that I've made. So in your reading you should have noticed that the last row is unfinished because I haven't analysed the quotations. So this is your task. I want you to pause the video again and add your own notes annotating each quotation. Remember to use technical terms. So you should end up with these 2 quotations at the bottom of the table having been bullet pointed with some ideas of key words, key techniques that you could analyse. So having done all of that planning, what does a successful paragraph look like? Remember the bingo card from earlier, and let's look at an example paragraph. Both sources have a sympathetic attitude towards the suffering soldiers. However, one difference is that whilst the sympathy in source A is much more personal and precise, source B presents the suffering in a more impersonal and horrible way. For example, in source A, the writer describes Simon's injuries. As well as losing his left eye, he now had only 20% vision in his right eye. He had lost both cheekbones, his nasal cartilage, 2 teeth, and a chunk of bone. The use of the syndetic list emphasises the amount of damage done to Simon's face, which creates sympathy, and the use of the statistic 20% shocks the reader. The noun chunk creates the impression that the damage is substantial. The repeated use of the pronouns he and his make these injuries personal, so the writer's sympathetic attitude is directed precisely towards Simon. By contrast, in source B, the injured soldier is just a man. This creates sympathy because it is impersonal, and creates the impression that nobody knows his name, and he's not treated like a human. His injuries are horrible, though black scurvy eating his legs away, his gums gone. The metaphor eating his legs away is disgusting and emphasises his suffering, and the adjective black has connotations of death and decay. I think the presentation of their sympathetic attitudes are slightly different in this way, because in source A, the writer wants us to empathise with this one particular soldier and see his excellent charity work, whereas in source B, the writer is overwhelmed by the number of soldiers who are injured and feels that society is treating them disrespectfully by not helping them more. So you should be able to see that, just like the bingo card suggests, I've started with a comparison. I've then quoted and analysed in loads of detail from source A, and I've done the same, quoted and analysed in detail from source B, and in both of those sections I've used technical terms. And then I've concluded the paragraph, just like the bingo card says, with a mini conclusion about why the two are different. So I'm referring back to the ideas that we came up with earlier about form, perspective and bias. Why is it that they're different? So it's your turn to have a go yourself. You can use the annotation notes from earlier in the video, you can use the table, you can use the mind map, you can use the words and phrases on the bingo card. All of those things will help you. Good luck with your response and with your revision.